Severe cognitive impairment, the paperwork read, filed with Social Security 3 years ago, bearing my signature, or something close to it, on documents I'd never seen. Unable to manage personal finances. Requires representative payee for all monetary affairs. The disability claim described a woman who couldn't remember her own address, who couldn't perform basic calculations, who needed constant supervision for daily living, and that woman was supposedly me. But why had I never received a single piece of mail about this claim? And why had my husband Derek been depositing $2,400 monthly into an account I didn't know existed while telling me we couldn't afford to fix the broken dishwasher? I'd found the paperwork while looking for our car insurance documents. Derek was at work. I was home early from my job, my actual job, as a licensed structural engineer designing bridges that carried thousands of vehicles daily. I needed the insurance card for a minor fender bender. Instead, I found evidence that my husband had been committing fraud in my name for 3 years. The folder was hidden in his locked desk drawer, the drawer he'd always said contained work stuff that was confidential. I'd picked the lock with a bobby pin, expecting to find boring corporate documents. I found my entire identity, rewritten as a fiction. The claim had been filed 37 months earlier. According to the paperwork, I suffered from early-onset dementia, the result of a traumatic brain injury I'd supposedly sustained in a car accident that had never happened. The claim included medical documentation from a doctor I'd never visited, describing symptoms I'd never experienced, recommending a representative payee to manage my finances because I was incapable of understanding monetary concepts. The representative payee was Derek. The monthly benefits, $2,400, went to an account at a bank I'd never heard of. 3 years of deposits totaled over $86,000. I sat at his desk for an hour, reading every document, photographing every page, trying to understand how this was possible. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. The structural calculations I performed daily required cognitive abilities far beyond what the claim described. I wasn't disabled. I was being robbed. The scope of the deception was staggering. Derek had created an alternate version of me, a woman who existed only in government databases, a woman who couldn't function independently, a woman whose husband had to manage everything because her damaged brain couldn't be trusted. He'd forged medical records. He'd forged my signature. He'd created a fictional car accident with fictional injuries and fictional ongoing symptoms. And he'd done it while I worked full-time, designed infrastructure projects, and believed his constant claims of financial hardship. We can't afford that vacation. We're barely making ends meet. Your car needs repairs, but we don't have the money right now. I know you want to renovate the kitchen, but things are tight. For 3 years, I'd lived frugally, carefully, believing our modest lifestyle reflected our modest means. I'd skipped purchases I wanted, delayed plans I'd made, apologized for suggesting anything that cost money. Meanwhile, $2,400 a month, $28,800 a year, flowed into Derek's secret account. He'd been living a double financial life, and I'd been too trusting to notice. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I contacted a lawyer. Then I contacted Social Security's Office of Inspector General. Then I contacted the FBI, because representative payee fraud is a federal crime. Mrs. Patterson, can you come in for an interview? The Social Security investigator asked. Absolutely. But I want to bring some documentation of my own. What kind of documentation? Proof that I'm not disabled. Proof that I've never been disabled. Proof that my husband has been committing fraud while I designed bridges that carry 50,000 vehicles per day. The silence on the line was profound. I'll clear my afternoon schedule, he said. The interview at the Social Security office was surreal. Investigator Robert Chen, a serious man in his 50s with the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen everything, reviewed the disability claim file while I sat across from him with my own stack of documents. According to our records, you suffered a traumatic brain injury 4 years ago. You're unable to perform basic cognitive functions. You require supervision for all financial decisions. According to your records, I'm a vegetable. According to reality, I spread my documents across his desk. I'm a licensed professional engineer. Here's my current license. Here are the project certifications I've signed in the past year. Here's my performance review from 3 months ago, describing my exceptional analytical abilities and complex problem-solving skills. He examined each document carefully. Here's my graduate transcript from Stanford. Here's my published research on seismic-resistant bridge design. Here's the award I received last year from the American Society of Civil Engineers. Mrs. Patterson. And here's the forged signature on the disability application, compared to my actual signature on these engineering documents. Even a casual observer can see they don't match. Investigator Chen set down the papers and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Your husband did this? My husband did this. For 3 years. While I worked full-time and believed we were struggling financially. The medical documentation is fabricated. I've never seen Dr. Harold Weiss, the physician listed on those forms. I've never been treated for cognitive impairment. I've never been in a car accident. We'll need to verify. Verify everything. Please. I want this investigated completely. The investigation moved quickly once they understood the scope. Dr. Harold Weiss, the physician who'd supposedly diagnosed my cognitive impairment, didn't exist. The medical license number on the documents belonged to a dermatologist in Florida who never heard of me. The clinic listed as my treatment facility had closed 5 years earlier. Derek had created an entire fictional medical history, complete with forged records and imaginary healthcare providers. The Social Security Administration's fraud detection should have caught this. The inconsistencies were obvious in retrospect: a woman supposedly unable to manage finances while maintaining professional licensure, a traumatic brain injury with no hospital records, a disability claim with no independent medical verification. But the system was overwhelmed. Fraud investigators were understaffed. Derek's paperwork had been just professional enough to slip through. For 37 months. The arrest happened at Derek's office. I wasn't present, but investigators told me about it later. 2 FBI agents, accompanied by local police, approached him during a meeting with clients. He'd been mid-presentation when they asked him to step outside. Derek Patterson, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and representative payee fraud against the Social Security Administration. He'd been cooperative initially, confused, apparently, claiming there must be some mistake. Then they'd mentioned my name. Your wife filed a complaint. She seems remarkably cognitively intact for someone with severe dementia. According to investigators, Derek's face had gone gray. She found the documents, Mr. Patterson. All of them. Including the account statements showing exactly where $86,400 in fraudulently obtained benefits went. The explanation Derek eventually provided was pathetic in its simplicity. He'd been in debt. Credit cards, sports gambling, poor investments he'd hidden from me. Our financial problems weren't fictional, they were just caused by him, not by circumstances beyond our control. The disability fraud had started as a temporary solution. He'd planned to pay off his debts quickly and then somehow cancel the claim before anyone noticed. But the money was easy. $2,400 a month, deposited automatically, no oversight because I was supposedly too impaired to question anything. The debts kept growing. The fraud kept continuing. I was going to stop, he told investigators. I just needed a little more time. 3 years. 37 months of collecting checks while his wife, a licensed engineer with a master's degree, believed they couldn't afford a vacation. Did it ever occur to you that she might notice? The FBI agent asked. She trusted me. She never looked at our finances, I handled everything. He'd exploited my trust as efficiently as he'd exploited the government. I'd believed him when he said we were struggling. I'd never questioned his management of our money because I'd assumed we were partners, working together toward shared goals. Instead, I'd been a mark. A victim. A source of fraudulent income he could tap without consequences. The legal proceedings were extensive. Derek was charged with wire fraud, identity theft, making false statements to a federal agency, and representative payee fraud. The combined charges carried potential sentences of up to 30 years. His lawyer attempted various defenses: mental health issues, financial desperation, lack of intent to permanently deprive, but the evidence was overwhelming. He'd forged documents, created fictional medical records, and systematically stolen money for 3 years. The plea bargain offered him 8 years in federal prison. He took it. The divorce was finalized while Derek awaited sentencing. He contested nothing. What could he contest? He'd admitted to fraud, to deception, to building our entire marriage on a foundation of lies I'd never suspected. The assets were divided simply. I kept everything, because everything was either mine to begin with or purchased with money he'd stolen from the government. The house, the cars, the savings, all mine now, by default. It wasn't a victory. It was salvage from wreckage. The recovery of stolen benefits was more complicated. Social Security demanded repayment of the $86,400 in fraudulently obtained benefits. The money was gone, spent on Derek's debts, his hidden gambling, his parallel financial life. Since I was the victim, not the perpetrator, I wasn't liable for repayment. But the process of clearing my records was exhausting. Every document had to be corrected. Every database had to be updated. Every agency had to acknowledge that I wasn't cognitively impaired and never had been. This is the most comprehensive identity fraud I've seen in 20 years, Investigator Chen told me during one of our follow-up meetings. Most representative payee fraud involves elderly victims or people with genuine disabilities. Creating a fictional disability for someone who is obviously healthy and professionally accomplished, that takes a different kind of criminal. What kind? The kind who thinks he's smarter than everyone. The kind who's so confident in his manipulation that he never considers getting caught. Derek had been that confident. He'd watched me work, watched me solve complex engineering problems, watched me perform at a high professional level, and simultaneously told the government I couldn't remember my own address. The cognitive dissonance of his deception was staggering. My colleagues learned about the situation when court records became public. I'd been private about my divorce, citing only irreconcilable differences. But federal fraud cases are public record, and someone at my firm discovered the details. Your husband told Social Security you were mentally disabled? My supervisor, Margaret, stared at me with something between horror and admiration. While you were designing the Route 17 interchange? For 3 years. That's the most insulting thing I've ever heard. You're one of our best engineers. According to Social Security, I couldn't manage my own checkbook. According to reality, you managed a $40 million infrastructure project last year. Margaret shook her head. I'm glad he's going to prison. So am I. The Professional Licensing Board investigated my credentials. Not because of wrongdoing, because the disability claim raised questions about my fitness to practice. If I genuinely had severe cognitive impairment, my engineering license should have been reviewed. The investigation was brief. My work record was impeccable. My project history showed 0 errors, 0 safety issues, 0 indications of impairment. Colleagues testified to my competence. Medical professionals confirmed I had no diagnosed conditions affecting cognition. The board cleared me completely, adding a note to my file explaining that fraudulent claims had been filed without my knowledge or consent. But the experience left scars. For months afterward, I second-guessed every calculation, every decision, every professional judgment. The fraudulent claim had described a woman who couldn't be trusted with complex tasks. That woman didn't exist. But sometimes, in dark moments, I wondered if Derek had seen something in me that I couldn't see myself. Therapy helped with that. The sentencing hearing was my last contact with Derek. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The victim impact statement I'd submitted said everything necessary. But I watched as the judge addressed him. Mr. Patterson, you exploited your wife's trust in a particularly cruel way. You created a fictional version of her, cognitively impaired, dependent, incapable, and you profited from that fiction for 3 years. For 3 years. Derek kept his eyes on the table. What makes this worse is the contrast between your fictional wife and your actual wife. Dr. Patterson, the judge nodded toward me, is a licensed professional engineer who designs infrastructure that protects public safety. While you told the government she couldn't manage basic finances, she was managing multi-million-dollar projects. Your Honor, I take full responsibility, Derek started. I'm not finished. You didn't just steal money. You stole her identity, her capability, her sense of security in her own marriage. You weaponized her trust and transformed it into a criminal scheme. The 8-year sentence was upheld. Derek was taken into custody immediately. He didn't look at me as they led him away. I was grateful for that. Rebuilding took longer than I'd expected. Not financially, I was stable there. My career continued. My professional reputation, if anything, was enhanced by my dignified handling of a nightmare situation. The rebuilding that took time was internal. Learning to trust again. Learning to believe in my own competence after someone had so thoroughly undermined it. Learning to see my marriage clearly rather than through the distorted lens of Derek's lies. Therapy helped. Time helped. Work helped. Every successful project was proof that the fictional version of me had never existed. I met someone eventually. 3 years after the divorce, I started dating again. Carefully, slowly, with therapy-informed awareness of my tendency to trust too completely. His name was Marcus. He was a high school physics teacher who thought my engineering work was fascinating and my disability fraud story was infuriating. He told the government you were cognitively impaired while you designed bridges? Marcus shook his head during one of our early conversations. That's not just fraud. That's contempt disguised as crime. What do you mean? He didn't just think he could get away with it. He thought you'd never figure it out. He thought you were so oblivious, so trusting, so incapable of questioning him, that you'd never notice he was stealing $2,400 a month. I'd never thought of it that way. But Marcus was right. The fraud wasn't just about money. It was about how Derek saw me, as someone to be managed, manipulated, deceived without consequence. I noticed eventually, I said. You noticed, you investigated, you reported him, and now he's in federal prison. Marcus smiled. That's not the ending he expected. No. It wasn't. The story became something I spoke about publicly. Victim advocacy groups asked me to share my experience. Representative payee fraud against healthy adults was rare, and my case illustrated vulnerabilities in the system. I agreed because the fraud detection failures that allowed Derek's scheme needed attention. Social Security's verification processes were inadequate. Medical documentation was accepted without independent confirmation. Representative payees faced minimal oversight. The system is designed to help genuinely disabled people, I explained at one conference. But it's also vulnerable to exploitation by people who understand its weaknesses. My husband understood those weaknesses. For 3 years, he collected benefits for a fictional disability while I worked as a licensed professional engineer. How do we prevent this? Someone asked. Better verification. Independent medical review. Cross-checking with employment records. If the system had compared my disability claim to my active professional license, the fraud would have been obvious immediately. The changes I advocated for were eventually implemented, not because of my case alone, but because my case contributed to a larger conversation about fraud prevention. Derek was released after 6 years, with good behavior credit. I received notification from the Victim Services Coordinator. He was barred from contacting me, barred from the state where I lived, required to report to a probation officer for the remainder of his sentence. I felt nothing when I read the notification. Not anger, not satisfaction, not fear. He was irrelevant now. A chapter that had closed. A cautionary tale I told to help others. The woman he described in those fraudulent documents, cognitively impaired, unable to manage finances, dependent on others for basic decisions, had never existed. The woman who'd uncovered his fraud, reported it to federal investigators, and testified at his trial existed very much. She was me. She'd always been me. He filed a disability claim saying I had severe cognitive impairment. For 3 years, he collected $2,400 a month while I designed bridges, managed complex projects, and solved engineering problems that protected public safety. He told me we were broke while $86,000 accumulated in his secret account. The Social Security investigators' face when I walked in with my engineering license, my performance reviews, my published research, that's a moment I'll never forget. He created a fictional version of me that couldn't exist in the same world as the real me. The real me caught him. The real me reported him. The real me watched him go to prison for 8 years. The cognitive impairment was never mine. It was his, the impairment that made him believe he could steal from his wife forever without consequence.